Hi there, Christian Henson from Spitfire Audio here. It's a total honour to be showcasing the talents of a brilliant sample developer, Sounddust, Pendle Poucher, who I would also consider a friend. I don't know, for me, the use of the word cool, I hate. I think trying to be cool is the least cool thing you could be. So I would say this is not about adding some cool dust to your music. This is about adding some Brighton dust to your music. The home of Nick Cave, of Uncle, of many, Fatboy Slim, I think he lives there, Norman Cook. It's just a real kind of breeding ground of British interesting, I would say. And this is no exception with Sounddust. I'm showcasing both Sounddust 1, but concentrating mainly on Sounddust 2, which is a new collection of oddities and eccentricities from our friend down south. Now, I have to say that I'm guilty of not reading manuals, and I haven't seen Paul's walkthrough on this yet. So I've basically gone in blind to create a composition in the way that I only know how, which is to fiddle around, and the minute it stops sounding like mistakes, that's a composition. The whole thing centres around Flutter dust. This is the thing that's caused the kind of spark of inspiration. I don't really know how all of these knobs and buttons work, but what I love about them is the minute you start moving them around, amazing, magical things start happening. It's no exception here, where I just found that there was this kind of cross between some kind of belly piano and this great granular kind of moment crescendo coming up, and that basically formed the whole kind of shape of this composition. So that's basically what I played in there. So just literally playing in very simple pads, no funny business, no automation, nothing like that. So the whole theme of this piece is very much kind of going to be that kind of crescendo-laden stuff. And I thought I'd kind of go back to my roots and do something urban with it, because there's some great drum sounds in this collection as well. So I took this Flutter instrument and I really made the most of this sense of crescendo. And what I've done here is I've done some automation with the volume here to really force that sense of crescendo. But with urban music, I think the way I approach it is to imagine that I'm working with decks and like crossfaders, and how a DJ would kind of mix stuff up and throw you some curveballs. So what I've done here is I've added some distortion. So let's just hear it without. It's already saturated with the distortion. What I love about these kind of crescendos is it bubbles underneath and then it takes over the entire mix, as you'll hear when I play it down. So I've got these great drum sounds. Again, I know that I'm not even scratching the surface of what this is capable of, but I just love the sound. So I just played those in live and did quite kind of an unusual triplet beat. And then I separated them off into separate snares and kicks. So let's just have a listen to the kick first. So to hear, that's how the triplet lies. And then I put on some distortion. It's not really for the quality of sound that it adds. For me, in a really full sounding mix, I think putting distortion on very basic things just helps for it to have a presence other than just a subtone. And then I compressed it to bejesus. I'm using all of the basic Logic plugins. Poking the initial attack out to give it a real kind of fat kick sound. And then I've also made it stereo, which isn't great for having a tight bottom end, but I just enjoy the width of this sound. I just make sure I turn it up really loud in the mix. It's interesting because the kind of the attack seems to be shifting around the stereo field, but I think it's quite interesting. So let's move on to the snare, and I've done a few cheeky things with this as well. It's very kind of intermittent snare. This is it dry. Nice sound. And then I put a bit of kind of accentuated the bottom. Really feel that thwack. And then a bit of distortion. And then a bit of compression to really give it a thwack at the front end. Oh, makes it bloody loud, to be honest. And then I put some cheeky reverb on. I'm not a huge fan of this reverb in Logic, but it's fine for this kind of use of just a bit of sauce on the snare. really fat sound. I don't think audio engineers would appreciate that amount of bottom end on that, but it seems to work within the context of the mix. Then what I've also done is I actually baked some of these snares, and points have reversed them. So you'll hear here, let's do it without the original. And that's where the reverb really helps. It gives it that lovely kind of introduction to the sound. And if you hear it with the snare, whack. I don't know why that makes it feel so much kind of heavier, but it's I don't know, it's like there's some kind of whip sound to it. I think that you associate with being clubbed to death or something. I also doubled that snare thwack up with a reversed kick. And what I also did is I just time stretched the kick, so its introduction, the swell up, is longer and more pronounced, and it's just a bit glitchy in a way that I quite like. Again, this kind of distorted artifacts, when you add them to bassy sounds, it means for me they cut through. It's not just something that you notice when you attach your big fat speakers, it's something that is present regardless of what you're listening to it on. So let's just have a listen to it in isolation. And then with the two snares, so kick and two snares. You'll also notice that I've got several different kicks, basically because it's so pitched. I change the notes with the what the kind of bass line is doing. So we've got root kick there, root just kind of sharpened. So if we have a listen, all I did is simply change the tuning in the Pendle's contact instrument. So let's listen to that. Now, the reason why I put this automation in is because the tail interferes, because particularly with this semitone jump, it causes a clash, and it really dirties up the bottom end. And hear the two, it kind of flabbles around. Just makes it much cleaner. Next up, we did some hi-hat parts. Again, using Pendle's Chaos Engine. Let's just take these off for now so you hear it dry. Love it. And then just rolled off the bottom and put some delay on. Which gives it all sorts of stereo interest as well. So if we put those all together, the snare, I also fed it into its own stem with just take the very bottom end off to make the mix as efficient as possible, and then added a bit of compression. So let's hear it without first. Right, so that sounds nice and fat. I am like ruining the Logic bus. I don't know what Logic does, because that for me isn't like fully overloading in a digital sense. So it's hitting some mysterious internal limiter, and I like the sound that it creates, even if it is slightly clipped. Again, those top end transients being added to bassy stuff for me makes things more kind of hearable on a multitude of systems. I also created some pylons. Now, this is a phrase that was coined by myself and MC Conrad back in the LTJ Bookham days, which was LTJ would always do these amazing, beautiful sound washes, soundscapes, but he never wanted it to be too beautiful sounding, so we'd always put pylons on the soundscape, and that's just an ugly, slightly evil sound. So basically this has got all sorts of muck on it. Let's have a listen to this. It's kind of got a tambourine quality, again, from this Chaos Engine drum set, which is just awesome. Like a sonar ping with a bit of a tambourine on it. So I've rolled off that slightly kicky element, and also didn't want too much of the tambourine. So let's have a look at the EQ. Quite obscene. Just the bits that I found useful, and then a bit of distortion. Just kind of lo-fi's it a bit, compressed it. Don't know if this is going to make a huge amount of difference, to be honest. I think it's probably, I just duplicated a drum track. Oh, a little bit, yeah. Strange how that affects the EQ, the quality of the sound. Okay, tape delay, which is just a slightly uglier sounding delay than the standard Logic stereo delay. And basically what happens is when you turn up the feedback and it keeps on feeding back with loads of flutter and flutter intensity, the sound really does kind of mangle. And then because it's very kind of down the middle, I just want it to be something that's kind of happening around the mix. So I find the tremolo a really good way of stereoizing stuff. So here we go. And then I think I recall just putting loads, masses of this awful reverb on, like 90% wet. It's amazing how the flutter changes the quality of the reverb. And that doesn't sound particularly good in isolation, but when you hear it in the mix, you know, it'll have this sense of a distant pylon, I hope. Okay, moving on to Sound Dust 1. For me, the Dulcitone has been my greatest get out of jail card. And when I first met Pendle, it was this kind of clandestine meeting in the National Film Theatre on the South Bank. And I just had to thank him because there were so many pitches I'd won, particularly when kind of John Brion came to the fore and everyone was trying to do these slightly hokey sounding scores. The Dulcitone for me is just such an unusual, real, broken sounding instrument. And there's wonderful presets in this offering. Just wonderful. And then I've got this second one here. Now, the particular notes I play have some slightly ugly artifacts, so I've actually pinged those out. Let me just run what it is actually playing, and you'll see that I've isolated these frequencies and I've kind of scooped them out. And then without. It's just slightly shrill for those notes. It still cuts through, but just takes the edge off ever so slightly. And then third, slightly drier sounding one. Great with these unusual delays and stuff. And I've got all of these going down their own dedicated bell channel, and I've got some interesting automation for this channel, which I'll take you through in a minute. Then I wanted to add an orchestral element, and I don't know, because it's kind of got an urban-y sound to it, I just wanted to do something that was ridiculously simple. And there's no better tool than the Ólafur Arnalds waves, which are part of his Chamber Evolutions. And I've just rigged up the basses to the same channel as the rest of the bands, the cellos, violas and violins, and it literally is just hitting chords. Giving the whole piece a slightly, dare I say it, mezzanine kind of feel, Massive Attack kind of feel. And then all I did up here, just to kind of rinse it out a bit more, is I duplicated these regions and just transposed them up 12 and then slid them along a couple of beats. So let's just have a listen to those. So they have this nice kind of cascading quality with also some stereo delay that I added and just picking out the bottom end and the very top. So it just really cuts through that wonderful sound of the rosin, which is the wax that they put on the bows to give them the friction that's required to make the strings resonate. That bum note does sound correct in context. So what I'm doing is something called the Sidechain Compressing this stem, the orchestral dust stem down there, which is the original inspiration instrument, the sound dust instrument, plus Ólafur Arnalds Chamber Evolutions playing these wonderful waves. And so basically this track or stem is being compressed, but not according to what the track itself or the stem itself is doing. It's being compressed according to what the drums are doing. So if we run this, you'll see This needle is moving somewhat randomly. Well, that's actually moving in time to the kick and the snare of the drums, and you'll hear that the mix is just kind of being suppressed, squashed. Again, this just helps me to scoop out the kick and the snare so it's as fat as humanly possible. It kind of clears a little pathway so the kick can really drive through. You can actually really dial this up to create quite kind of an extreme effect. I'll show you the principle of this. Gives it a real suck, something well worth playing with. That's basically the composition. And then I just kind of return to this idea of, okay, now you can make these quite ambient, urban sounding tracks. I think this is quite a good driving track. This thing, you know, in TV and film, I think only works if it is full up. So this is the kind of track that I would write for, or cue that I would write for a sequence that doesn't have much dialogue in, because when you sit these kind of drums back in the mix, they just sound really feeble. It's all about, you know, the kick is a great sound from Pendle, the snare's a great sound from Pendle, but what makes it sound super fat is its relative volume. And the minute you turn that down behind, I don't know, car noise, room ambience and stuff like that, it just simply psychologically sounds feeble. So this stuff only works, and I'm really monitoring this loud as well, only works when it's kind of played in your face. But basically, returning to these kind of this idea of it being having an urban flavour, you know, it's quite easy to make just a kind of flat track that just does one thing. What I like to do in an ambient minimal track that doesn't have a huge amount of melody is to throw curveballs, so there's some form of interaction with the listener. And I've done this simply with automation as a means of just imitating how you would use a kind of a turntable cross mixer, that kind of stuff. So there'll be points where I kill absolutely everything in favour of, say, a kick drum. But what I'm actually doing, say an example of this point here, is I'm actually still triggering the orchestral material. You can see it being kind of played there, but actually all that's coming back in on a snare beat is the kind of reverb of that sound. So if we just put the snare in so you can hear it, this is what it kind of sounds like. So basically it's like I'm chopping or pulling back the orchestra and then just kind of flicking it up on the snare hit. So that's a really kind of quite a dramatic moment, but it is, you know, I'm not re-triggering the strings at that point. I'm just literally cutting them in like I've unmuted them on a fader or flung the faders up. I'm also have employed on the stem for the bells a filter, and this has quite a high Q factor, which is the little kind of scooped peak that you put before a filter that gives it its filteriness. So not only have I done some automation, I've also automated bypassing the filter itself, because when it's fully up, it still has a sound quality that's not as attractive as the bells when they're just playing dry. This is kind of when the track starts rinsing out, and what I'm really trying to do is give everything its moment. And that's another one of those curveballs there. I actually created an auxiliary channel for the master mix, and I do a heinous bit of vroom on the entire mix, which I think is quite exciting. It kind of really matches up to this crescendo at the end there. And finally, I've also just put a little bit of bus compression and EQ on the final output channel. So this is the master bus, just a bit of, again, trying to make the mix as efficient and as radio friendly as possible. So a bit of compression and just a bit of EQ. Again, just using Logic's in-house plugins. Perfectly good enough for jazz. And that's basically it. I want to dive deeper into the Sound Dust, universe that Pendle has created and all the wild and wonderful things that it can do. But this is me just literally downloaded Sound Dust 2, wanted to play with it, wanted to incorporate it into a track, and this is what came out as a consequence. Thanks, as always, for tuning in. If you like what I've done here today, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, plenty of exciting stuff coming up. And if you want to be notified the next time we put a video up, just hit that little bell icon. See you next time.